Well, good morning. I'm Kotz. I'm the teaching pastor here at Westlight. We are starting a new series called Judged. And the little subtitle here is what does the Bible say about judging others, judging ourselves, and judging the church? And it's a really interesting topic. It's something that's been on my heart for a while. And I thought, you know what, it might be a good time to talk about this because there's an election coming around the corner. I don't know if you heard. And this is a time where we start judging each other. Right? So, I mean, it's applicable no matter what the season is, right? So, let me just start off by saying this. I don't know if you guys have heard this, I heard that Christians have a reputation of being judgmental. I don't know if you guys heard this. Yeah. And is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Well, depending on which Christian you ask, they might have different opinions. But the question is, why does the church have this reputation of being judgmental? And so I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of I am a Christian, but like, why would be the tendency of a Christian? Why would it be to have the reputation that we're judgmental? And I thought about it for a while, and I'm like, you know what? I understand. And here's the logic of why I understand why we have that reputation. You see, because when somebody judges somebody, when we judge somebody, we think we're right? Like, we think that we have the higher ground. We think that, we have a relationship with the creator of the world, and we have the word of God, and we read it, and we live according to it, and you know what? We have the whole thing called life figured out. Well, that's the reputation that we have, right? Like, oh yeah, we should have everything figured out, and therefore, if we see something that's leading to destruction, it would be our role, it would be an honor, it would be the loving thing for us to point it out to somebody else and say, hey, not to say that I'm better than you, but I think I am. You should stop doing that, right? Like, and so I understand why a lot of Christians feel like it's their duty to judge the people around them. And for that reason, we get that reputation of being judgmental. I don't know if I'm anywhere near truth here when I say this, but that's what I came up with, okay? Now, but then I looked around and I realized the church isn't the only group of people who have the reputation of being judgmental, right? Like, for example, you guys have been teenagers before. I thought my parents, and when I talked to my friends, when they were teenagers, they thought their parents were extremely judgmental towards them, right? But then I thought again, I understand now that I'm a parent, not of a teenager, but I understand because we've been teenagers before, and we're still okay right now, so we somehow navigated through the awkward years of being a teenager, and so we know more, right? And so when I see my teenager, which will be like in, 2 years, right? Right? When I see my teenager making some bad moves in his life, I'm going to be like, hey, I think I know better because I've been where you've been, I think, right? Even though they tell you, like, you don't understand, Mom, you don't understand, Dad. Like, but I do, And so as the person who has some high ground, and I should tell my son, hey, that's wrong. And that would be the loving thing for a parent to do, right? So it's not just a Christian problem, it's also a parent problem, right? But then when I thought about who else has the reputation of being judgmental, I thought, our neighbors. Like, our neighbors tell us, the music's too loud, or, like, you should take out your trash at this time instead of that time. I don't know if you have neighbors like that. So I'm like, wait, I understand, though, because my neighbors have been living in my neighborhood longer, and they might have some, hacks. They might have some tips and pointers. They might help me out, right? And so they're the ones with the higher ground, and they're going to tell me this is how you want to navigate. This is how you're going to live in peace and harmony with their neighbors. They live, like that. So it would be the loving thing for them to tell me and judge me, right? Like, and so I realized, wait, this isn't a Christian problem. It's not just a parent problem. It's just not a neighbor problem. It's a human problem. Like, we all have this issue, right? If it's not our parents, it's not Christians, if it's not our neighbors. Politicians, they judge each other when they're running for election. They're like, hey, that guy over there is acting like this, or that guy over there is acting like this, and they judge each other. It's a human problem. So whether if this is your first time at church or if this is your 100th time at church, I think this series will be somewhat applicable, okay? So if I were to say the quiet part out loud, we all have to say, we could admit that next slide, here we go. We have judged people, haven't we? Right? And a lot of us, if you don't want to admit it, then we have all judged people secretly with our eyes. You're like, I'm not going to say anything, but I'm judging, right? because sometimes we don't want to get into conflict, so we're just going to keep our comments to ourselves. We have all judged. Whether if it's secretly or out loud, we have all done it. And the opposite of this is also true, which is, well, we have also been victims of being judged, right? We have been judged. And, you know, for those of you who think, oh, like, for example, maybe some of you went to church a long time ago, and you came to church and you were dressed differently than everybody else, or you used different lingo than everybody else, or you didn't know when to stand or when to sit, and they're like, oh, you must be new, right? And you felt judged by the church. And because of that, you've avoided the church. And I get it. Okay, I remember one of my first times going to church too, and I'm like, I don't know what the pastor is saying because he uses Christianese, and I don't speak that language, right? I understand what it feels like to be judged by the church. Or maybe at work, you probably know, like, you've been judged at work. People have made comments about you behind your back, and you're like, oh man, I feel so judged. Or maybe people found out who you voted for, and you're feeling like you're being judged by amongst your peers. Or maybe you and your friends, you went out for a night out just to have some fun, and you know, you go to a restaurant and you all order drinks, and you realize, oh, I'm the only one that ordered an alcoholic beverage, and now you feel judged by your friends. Or it's the other way around. You all go out and everybody orders an alcoholic beverage except for you. You got a Diet Coke. And they're like, oh, what are you, a Christian? You know, like, right? And now you feel judged, right? So we've been on both sides of this diagram. We have judged, whether secretly or not, or we have been judged. And you realize that both sides, whether if you are the judger or the one that's being judged, it's both harmful, right? And so you come up with this opinion that's this. Judging doesn't accomplish anything positive. It doesn't. Here's the thing I learned about judging, okay, because I've been judged before. When somebody judges you, it doesn't make you want to become a better person, right? I've never been in a situation where somebody judged me and I'm like, dude, I want to be more like you. Like, I don't know if you've ever been there, right? Like, I've never been in a situation where I said, if that's what Jesus is all about, then sign me up. I want to be a Christian, right? Or the opposite is true in this case, right? Because you judged me, I want to avoid you as much as possible. Whether if it's becoming more like you, I want to avoid that. Or if I know that you're going to walk down the street every day, I want to walk down a different street. You just want to avoid a judger at all costs because nothing positive comes out of judging, so we think. And then you might be thinking, and Kotz, doesn't Jesus say, right? Doesn't Jesus say, next slide, don't judge? Isn't there a verse about that, like the book of Matthew or John? I don't know, one of the Gospels. Doesn't it say that? And yes, the Bible does say that, but it doesn't. Wait, it either says it or it doesn't. Well, okay. If you look for the words, you're going to find it. This is Matthew chapter 7. It says, do not judge. This is Jesus speaking. Do not judge. So the Bible does say it. But that's not the whole verse. Right? Oh, or what does the word judge mean in the Greek, Kotz? I know you're wondering, right? Because everybody here wants to know what the Greek word is. No, the Greek word for judge is the word krino, and it means to decide, to determine, or cast a verdict on somebody, right? So if you judging in this case is like, hey, you are a bad person. That is krino. That's judge. That's the word that Jesus is using here. Or you don't belong here. Or God hates you. These are all types of judgment that fits under this word judge, right? But look, Jesus says don't judge. Are we not supposed to judge, right? This is not the whole verse. And what you're going to find out when you read the rest of the verse is that Jesus is not teaching us not to judge. Let's look at the rest of the verse. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. So what Jesus is saying here is not don't judge. He's saying don't judge unless you don't want to be judged. So it's like a if and then kind of statement. If you judge, you will be judged. He's not saying don't judge. He's just saying, just remember, when you judge somebody, somebody else is going to judge you. And in this case, Jesus doesn't really say who. Is it God that's going to judge us? Is it the person we're judging that's going to judge us? Or are we talking about a church that's going to judge you? Like, Jesus is really ambiguous in this verse right here. Are you guys following? I know I've used the word judge like 100 times already. Stop judging me. Okay, so Jesus clarifies a little bit more in the next line. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. What do you mean by that, Jesus? Well, he's like, I knew you were going to ask that, Kotz. So let me clarify with the second part of the sentence. He says, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So Jesus is not saying you should not judge, right? He's not saying don't form an opinion about another person. He's not saying that. He's not saying that a destructive behavior of another person should not be addressed. That's not what he's saying here. What he's saying is, when you judge somebody, be careful because there is a repercussion to it. So what is Jesus trying to say here? He's basically saying there's a golden rule when it comes to judging, which is this. Judge others as you wish others would judge you. Judge others as you wish others would judge you. So I'll give you an example. True story. I was driving to church. This is like years ago. I was driving by myself because I think my son, I didn't have a daughter back then. My son, I think, was sick, so my wife stayed home. So I was driving myself to church. And about maybe 15 minutes down on the freeway, all of a sudden I started feeling this pain in my upper abdominal area. And I'm like, oh no, I need to get to the ER right now. It was so bad that I was vision was blurring, all that stuff. And I'm on the freeway, I'm on the 10 freeway, and I'm like, is there a hospital nearby? And I realized there's a Kaiser off the 10 freeway. I'm like, I need to go there. So I all of a sudden step on the gas and I'm driving faster. And then I get to off ramp and there's a red light and I'm like, I got to get myself to the hospital. So I look both ways and I run past the red light. There's no cars, and I'm like driving. I'm looking. I can't find hospitals, man. Where are the parking spots, right? So I'm like looking around. I need a parking spot. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm just gonna park illegally right here. I get out of the car and I run myself in, and they take care of me there. Now, a person who saw me driving that didn't know what I was going through would have probably judged me and said, oh, look at that typical Asian driver on a Sunday morning, right? Right? Now, here's the thing. When it comes to judgment, it doesn't allow for the person who's being judged to justify what just happened. They don't know my story. When people judge me, I want to have the opportunity to defend myself. If you understood what my medical condition was, maybe you will give me a different judgment. Maybe if you understood the situation I was in, the emergency that I was in, maybe you would judge me differently. But judgment does not allow for that to happen, right? Or maybe you've been in a situation where you feel like you were judged by somebody and you're like, if I could just let that person know, whoever's judging me, how I was raised. If I could let that person know, growing up, what I had and what I didn't have, maybe they will understand why I'm behaving the way I am right now. Maybe if they understood my trauma story. Or maybe if they knew my story as a child. Maybe if they understood my medical condition. Maybe if they understood this or that, then if they could take all that into consideration, maybe the judgment would be different. And when we say, judge others as you wish others to judge you, isn't that what we want people to do for us? Right? We want people to say, I understand, Kotz, I know your situation. And a lot of times when I judge, because, unfairly, I judge unfairly all the time, there's always somebody in my life group that would say, but Kotz, you have to understand their story. And I'm like, you're right. I don't know their story. Right? Or if you're watching professional sports and you're like, man, that guy is such a bad umpire, or that person is such a bad shooter, or why did the coach do this? Why did the coach do that? I always need that voice somewhere around me that would say, well, you have to understand, this person's in this situation, or last week this is what happened to that player. And I'm like, you're right, I shouldn't be judging them because that's not how I would want to be judged. Right? So we wish to be judged with grace, don't we? We want all that to be put into consideration before somebody judges us. And what Jesus is saying is this. So we should judge with grace also. Now, what's interesting is Jesus doesn't end his teaching right there. Because what comes right after what he just said here, he goes to the core issue of this thing. Because remember, he's not saying don't judge. He's saying when you judge somebody, make sure you judge them in the way that you wish to be judged. And then he goes into this territory of, and by the way you judge other people, you're basically putting a big label on your forehead saying, this is the kind of person I am. And so he gets to the core right here. How do you judge with grace? This is his teaching. he's talking to the audience, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Now, when Jesus was teaching this, he was trying to go for a laugh because, a little bit of humor goes a long way when you're teaching something that's very convicting. In the original language, the word sawdust isn't there. It's just a speck, and the translators were like, well, what's really small that you can't really see, but it's in somebody's eye? It's like, oh, sawdust, right? So he's saying, look at this little tiny thing that you usually can't see, right? And you're pointing that out in somebody else. Well, all along you have a telephone pole in your own eye. So everybody's like, haha, that's funny, Jesus, right? Stand-up comic Jesus. Okay. Now, what Jesus is doing here is that he's raising up a very important question. And I don't know some of you are familiar with this verse. I want you to consider something that maybe you haven't considered when you read this verse. When Jesus says there's a small speck in somebody's eye, it's something that you normally wouldn't notice. Let me put it this way. It's something that you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. It's basically invisible unless you're like, come here. Let me look in your eye. Hold on, let me get a flashlight out. There it is, right there. That's what Jesus is talking about here. In other words, Jesus is asking this. How did you see something nobody else noticed? How did you see that little thing that a normal person walking by would never see? You can only see this if you were actively looking for it. The implication Jesus is making here is huge. You're looking for that speck of sawdust in somebody else's eye because you already had prejudice. You already knew that person was guilty. You already knew you hated the person. You already knew that this is somebody that I need to discredit. And because of that, you went looking for it, and then you found it, and you're pointing it out. And the fact that you're busy looking for it implies something about me, right? It implies that I'm prejudiced. I already have this opinion about you that I consider to be true in my life, right, from my perspective, and I need to point it out to everybody else. This is what Jesus is saying in this. He's trying to be funny about it, but he's doing that because a spoonful of sugar usually helps the medicine go down, right? Goes down. Okay, next part. How can you say to your brother, oh, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? So, in this story, this teaching that Jesus, he's trying to get everybody to absorb, right? This is what he's saying, that the speck is a minor problem. And the plank, in this case, is the obvious prejudice you have towards the other person. Why are you looking for something that might not be there? Because I have this huge issue in my life. Compared to that speck, the bigger issue here is the person that's actually looking for that speck. Because I'm looking for it, right? So I'll give you a personal story, and this actually happened this past week, and maybe the sermon title for this should be, My Pastor's a Hypocrite, because I'm going to show you how bad of a person I am. So there's this preacher, and I listen to a lot of preachers, and I have very little patience for certain types of preachers. And the kind of preacher that I have very little patience for is the one that likes to just condemn people all the time. Right? If you don't agree with me, you're going to hell. Right? If you're not living the lifestyle that I think you should be living, you're going to hell. It's just not helpful, and it's hate-filled. I just don't like it, And there's certain people in the LA area, certain preachers in the LA area that have that reputation. And this past week, so every week I go to USC on campus to help out some students, be a pastor on site, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, who's the speaker today? And it's that pastor. Shows up. And I'm already at that point, I'm like, oh my gosh. The students don't need to hear this kind of sermon. I'm going to shake the dust off my sandals and I'm going to walk off because I don't want to be a part of this, right? But my duty was to be there for the students, so I stuck around. And the minute he started speaking, I picked up my phone, I started texting people, like, hey, guess who's preaching today? And then the person on the other side would be like, oh yeah, what is he talking about? I'm like, well, if he's talking about sports, maybe try to, relate to the students he's speaking to, right? Oh, now he's talking about hell. He's talking about hell, guys. H-E-L-L, there it is. Yep, he's condemning everybody. Oh, the verse he's using is taken out of context, right? And now I'm like pointing out the speck to everybody. And by doing that, I was actually putting a big label on my forehead saying that I am shallow. That I judge people based on, reputation. Do you see how that works? I'm being judged by me having prejudice towards other people. I'm revealing what a shallow person I am. So Jesus is asking this: why are you looking actively looking for proof of your prejudice? Right? And the way you answer this question, so the reason I'm looking for prejudice is because I want the world to know what I know, which is just an opinion, but I want people to think that's actual fact, right? So it reveals that maybe I'm insecure about this. I'm insecure about myself, that I would feel better if I had more people on my side, it reveals a lot about me, right? And not only that, Jesus is teaching here that when you start looking for a speck in somebody's eye, maybe you should ask yourself, before you say, I see a speck in that person's eye, maybe you should go through a test. And the test is this: have I made a judgment on them already? Have I done that already? Or maybe another way of looking at it is, Jesus is asking, before you start pointing out the speck in somebody's eye, let that be a reminder to you that maybe you have a broken relationship with the person you're judging. That you're not looking out for the best of that person. So what he's saying here is this: that the issue, right? The issue that I'm pointing out is the fact that I have an issue with that person is the issue that I need to be dealing with, not the speck in that person's eye. The issue that I should be dealing with is the fact that I have something picked with that guy right there. That's the issue, right? So Jesus continues. He says, "You hypocrite." And hypocrite basically is a combination of profound ignorance about myself while having an arrogant assumption about somebody else, right? That's what being a hypocrite means, right? He says, "You hypocrite, this is how you should deal with this." He says this. Next, he says, first, there's a two-step process here. The first thing you need to do is this: take the plank out of your own eye. What does that mean? This is code, right? What does he mean by this? He says this is what it means. Before you judge a person, check your heart. When you're judging somebody, that means that there's a broken relationship, this harmony that has been disrupted here. So before I start texting people about the speck I see in somebody, it's before you do it, check yourself. Is there a broken relationship? Why do you have such hatred towards the person, right? Kotz, what's your issue? And I'm okay, I need to deal with that, right? Check your heart. And when you check your heart, he says this: the first thing you need to do is you need to fix that relationship. What I should have done, which I didn't, but maybe I should, is go up to that preacher and say, "Hey, you don't know me. I know you by reputation. My name is Kotz. Let's get coffee sometime. I would love for you to meet my family one day. How can I pray for you?" Get to know the person. He may have a story, a trauma, an upbringing that led him to the views that he has. I don't know, but I'm already judging him, right? Maybe if I got to know this guy, maybe I'll be able to say, I disagree with their theology, but I totally understand where you're coming from. Because the problem is not with him, it's with me. So Jesus continues. He says, first, you hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye, and then, which is the next step, the two of two steps, you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Once you get to know the person, once you repair that relationship, once you are thinking in terms of how can it be for you instead of against you, once I get to that place in my life, then if you still see the speck, then when you say, hey, I see a speck in your eye, you have that relationship where the other person would say, I know Kotz means well. He's always looking out for me. So maybe he's saying this out of love. And now we can actually deal with the speck. Because by that time, once you repair that relationship, trust has been formed between me and the other person. So, let me break this down. If you don't have a relationship with the person, right, what it does is that when you point out a speck, it inflates the minor issue for spite. So, for example, this is me on the receiving end of judgment. This is a true story also. A few years ago, I spoke at a church somewhere in the San Gabriel area out there. Okay, and I gave a sermon, and people loved it. And I was like, yeah, good. But then that same evening, I get an email from somebody in that congregation. And this person basically emailed me and said, I don't have a relationship with this person, by the way. This person, he basically said, you said the words 17 times. Just wanted to point that out to you, Kotz, because I think you're a great speaker and great teacher. But if you take out the word I think you'd be better. Now, because I didn't have a relationship with this person, the way I received it was, you're taking such a small issue and you're making it to such a big deal. Are you doing this because, is it because it makes you feel better about yourself? Are you doing this because you don't like me? Right? These are the thoughts that went through my mind. Now, on the other hand, if I had a relationship with this person, so with relationship, and we have next slide, right? I will take that as a genuine concern. Kotz, I think your sermon was great, but if you just took out a few I think it would have been excellent. And I know in the future you have other speaking things that you're going to have to do. I want you to succeed so bad. I think this is something that will help you. Do you see how the same criticism is taken differently? One is seen as, oh, you're doing this to hurt me, and the other one is, oh, you're doing this because you love me. So what is Jesus doing here? What is Jesus trying to teach us? Jesus is encouraging us, right? He encourages us to judge with right relationships. If I were here speaking to you and I had something in my teeth, and if you came up to me after the sermon and say, hey, Kotz, you got something, did you have spinach? Because I see that right there. I'll be, because you, Westlight, I love you, and you guys, you love me. Or especially if somebody from my life group comes up to me and says, hey, Kotz, not to bring this up, but something's in your tooth, right? I would say, thank you so much. You know that after this I have an important meeting. I don't, but I know after this you have an important meeting, and I know you're just looking out for me. Thank you so much. The same comment made by somebody that I have a trust in and a person who I don't have trust in makes all the difference, and that's what Jesus is teaching us. That before you start making a comment or correcting somebody, make sure you have a good relationship with the person. Make sure you have trust, because it might change the course of my life if you were to make that comment to me. So, quick summary. When you see a speck of sawdust in somebody's eye, that is the opportunity for you to check yourself. Am I seeing the speck in that person's eye because I was looking for it? Or did I see the speck in that person's eye because I genuinely care about this person? And does that person know that I genuinely care about that person? And that makes all the difference. So Jesus isn't saying don't judge. Jesus is saying, before you judge, check yourself. Are you the issue, or are you really trying to genuinely love on somebody else? Now, why does this matter to God, right? Like God's like in heaven looking and saying like, oh yeah, make sure you judge, right. Why does it matter to him? It's because we as his church, we are the group of people that represents God. We are his hands and feet. We are his ambassadors. When the world looks at the church, they're going to say, oh, is that what God is like? If we judge people based not on love, but just because we're picking out, we're like sin sniffers, like, I smell sin somewhere. You, sinner, repent. I love you, right? Like, if that's the reputation of the church, then we start to assume that that's how God judges. Oh, I'm probably going to hell because I did this in my life. Do we all really think that's how God acts and how he behaves? Don't you think God is the one that would say, I see the life you lived, but I also know your trauma. I know your story. I know your medical condition. I know that you were trapped in a corner and that's the best you could do. Don't you think that that's how God, loving God, that's how he would judge, right? But because the church has not been like that, when the world looks at the church and then they say that must be what God is like, they start to think that that's how God judges us, that he doesn't judge us with compassion. He judges us based on external, what it looks like from the outside, basically, external factors. And God says, that's not me. That is not me. And if that's who you thought I was, then my church has not done her job. And this is why it's so important. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about judging, how we judge others. Next week, Lori's going to be talking about how we judge ourselves. What does the Bible say about how we should view ourselves? How harsh should we be on ourselves? And the week after that, we're going to look at a passage that Paul wrote. And he basically says we need to judge, especially the people inside the church. So we'll talk about that. And we're going to be talking about other aspects of judging in the coming weeks, because I think this is so important, like I said in the beginning, especially in this season of election, because that's when people think that the church is getting extra judgy. So may we all learn to judge in the way that Christ called us to judge. Amen? Amen. All right, let's pray.